Hi everybody, I'm here today to talk about Daredevil Epic Collections. And we've got a lot of Daredevil Epic Collections to talk about. So let's quickly take a look inside this new volume that just came out recently, and then we'll come back afterwards to talk about more Daredevil Epic Collections. Okay, let's take a look inside Daredevil. Actually, before we look inside, let's take a look at the spine. There's old Hornhead himself right on the spine there. And the back cover looks like this. And there's the contents, a straight run of Daredevil plus an issue of Marvel 2-in-1. This is classic Daredevil, perhaps a little bit goofier than you would come to expect from old Hornhead if you know him post Frank Miller, but that's because he hadn't gone through that time yet. This is also a period where Daredevil shared the spotlight with Black Widow, so she's in several of these issues. Bob Brown does a lot of the artwork in here, along with different inkers, including this one here, Vince Colletta. But once we get a little further into the book, we see the return of Gene Colan. And then we even get some Don Heck. Look at that. Steve Gerber does the first half of this book, and after that it's Tony Isabella, who does a big long story with Hydra in this volume here. There's some more of the fantastic Gene Colan. The last few issues in this book feature a story by Marv Wolfman that introduced the character of Bullseye, of course one of Daredevil's greatest foes. So if you want to know about his origin or read the first few stories of Bullseye's, you'll want to buy this volume here. Not sure why they didn't go with this cover featuring Bullseye when the title is Watch Out for Bullseye, but you know, oh well. Bonus features include some articles from Foom as well as a few other goodies, including some original art. There are a lot of Daredevil Epic Collections out right now. 15 of them, with another one coming a little bit later this year, which I'll get to in a second. There are only a few gaps left to fill in the Epic Collection, including the famous Frank Miller run, but let's see how they break down. We're gonna have to move fast because there's a lot of material to cover, so let's go. The first two Daredevil Epic Collections obviously start from the very beginning, right in 1964 with his debut, and going up until 1966. Volume 1 is called The Man Without Fear, and Volume 2 is called Mike Murdock Must Die. This is where we see a lot of the formation of the character. He has his original yellow costume, and we meet a ton of his villains for the first time, and then he settles into his red costume. The writer on all these stories is Stan Lee, and at the very beginning, Wallace Wood was the artist. He's the one who came up with the Daredevil design, and then John Romita took over for a brief stint after that. And then in Volume 2, all of the artwork is by Gene Colan, and it's absolutely stunning, some of the best stuff. Volume 1 has been reprinted recently, so if you missed out the first time around, I suggest going to your comic shop and seeing if you can secure yourself a copy of it now. And a reprint of Volume 2 is going to be coming out later this year, so keep an eye out for that too. Volume 3, Brother Take My Hand, and Volume 4, A Woman Called Widow, take Daredevil into the 70s. This is a period where Black Widow becomes one of the main characters in this series. In fact, the cover prominently features Daredevil and Black Widow as marquee headlining characters, even though Black Widow's name is not in the legal information. This is the period where Stan Lee steps off of the title, giving the reins over to Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway. Gene Colan still does a lot of the artwork in here, and he's assisted a few times by a few different people, including Barry Windsor Smith. Volume 5, Going Out West, is exactly what the title says. It has Daredevil and Black Widow going over to the west coast of the United States to spend some time there, getting to know the crime scene and the villains on that side of the continent. These stories are by Jerry Conway, and after that Steve Gerber starts writing, and he's known for being a little bit more out there, and you'll have to read it to believe it. There are some pretty strange things that'll happen in this book here. And I've already talked about Volume 6, so I don't think we need to dwell on that anymore, do we? This is where we have our first gap. Volumes 7 to 11 isn't in the Epic Collection yet. We don't know when it's coming. It hasn't been announced, hasn't been revealed. This is the era that also includes the very famous Frank Miller run with Born Again, and so they might be saving that for very last. Who knows? We're going to have to wait and see. But once we get to volume 12 and 13, we now enter the Senti run. She's the one who took up the writing duties after Frank Miller, and boy, that was a hard act to follow, but she does a great job introducing characters like Typhoid Mary, one of her most famous creations. If you're looking for volume 13, A Touch of Typhoid, it's going to be reprinted soon, later this year, so keep an eye out for that. These Daredevils are quite a bit different than the earlier volumes because Frank Miller did a lot to change the tone of the character and the tone of the book. So if you skip right from that volume to one of these ones, you'll be in for a little bit of a shock. And some people like this better, some people don't. You're going to have to make up your mind when you read it yourself. Volumes 14 and 15 are the conclusion to Ann Nesenti's run. That's 4 volumes of Ann Nesenti. Volume 14 is a lot of Inferno crossovers, that X-Men storyline. We don't get to see any actual X-Men in here, but Daredevil does face his share of demons during that storyline. And then Last Rites is the end of Nesenti's run, but then the beginning of D.G. Chichester's run with a very famous story called The Fall of Kingpin. You're going to want to check that one out because it's pretty good. If you missed out on Last Rites the first time around, rest assured it is also being reprinted, and we'll see that coming up toward the end of 2023. Volume 16 is called Dead Man's Hand, and it features a very long crossover with Daredevil and Nomad and Punisher War Journal. Takes up most of this book, in fact. Scott McDaniel joins the team as artist in this book, and you'll see him go through a big evolution over the next few volumes in his own personal style. And then volume 17 is called Into the Fire, and it's coming out later this year, but it's going to include another Frank Miller story, a miniseries called Man Without Fear. Once we get that volume, it's going to plug that hole right between these volumes and these volumes, so we're going to have a straight run of Daredevil from volume 12 all the way to volume 21, and that is pretty incredible. So here we are now in the 90s. Who remembers this storyline, Fall from Grace? This is the return of Elektra, and this is where Daredevil gets a new costume. It's dark and gritty and has lots of sharp, pointy parts, and this is Daredevil for the 90s. Chichester is the writer on here as he goes through this volume and wraps up his run in volume 19, Root of Evil, which is also the name of the Elektra miniseries that he and Scott McDaniel do. And then wrapping up the Daredevil Epic Collections are these ones, volumes 20 and 21. After Chichester left, Daredevil went through a number of writers, including J.M. DeMatteis, Carl Kessel, Joe Kelly, Scott Lobdell, all of them kind of keeping the status quo, not knowing really what to do with the character, and then eventually, they canceled the book and relaunched it as the Marvel Knights Daredevil title. But these two are presumably the final volumes in the Daredevil Epic Collections as far as the classic era is concerned. My guess is that the modern era Daredevil Epic Collections will start with Guardian Devil, the Marvel Knights Daredevil story by Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada. We'll see if that happens. We should be getting some news about that really soon. So that's the Daredevil Epic Collections. I thank everybody for being on this big long journey with me. If you have any questions about these, leave me a comment and I'll do my best to answer it. But otherwise, what are you looking forward to? Which is your favorite volume of Daredevil? I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments.